gospel reading today comes from Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. In the Gospels, we usually are trying to keep up with Jesus as he's moving from place to place to place. We start with him on the go again. After Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a slave whom he valued highly, and who was ill and close to death. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, asking him to come and heal his slave. When they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. But when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. This ends our gospel reading. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This is a very straightforward scripture reading. Jesus had finished teaching in one community and moved on to the next one to share his wisdom with another group of people. He barely arrived in Capernaum when a group of elders approached him, asking him to perform another miracle healing. But there was a catch this time. The person they wanted Jesus to help was the slave of a Gentile. And not just any Gentile, but an officer in the Roman army. They were sent by this centurion, this occupying military leader, to ask for a miracle for a guy in charge of keeping them subject to their oppressors. So not wanting Jesus to reject their request to help a non-Jew, they quickly shared their assessment of the man's justification for receiving help. Little did they know, Jesus is no respecter of position and requires nothing of those he helps. Somewhere in the waiting, somewhere between the time that the centurion sent his group of elders to speak to Jesus, he had a revelation. There was no need for Jesus to make a personal appearance. Certainly, anyone who could command evil spirits could perform a miracle from a distance. So he sent another envoy this time to say, "Don't go out of your way to come here. Just exercise your authority to heal my gravely ill slave from wherever you are on your journey." Message received. Jesus uses the teaching moment to suggest to the people that faith is not tied to the labels we wear, such as national origin or religious affiliation or even job title. Faith is something within a person, and anyone can have it. With that, he healed the slave and went on with his day. Simple story. Jesus teaches, he moves to the next location, he's met by a group of people with a need for a miracle, he performs a from-a-distance healing, and everybody is happy. So, our message from the story is, isn't that nice? A Roman officer cared enough about a slave to send the Jewish elders to ask Jesus for a miracle. And Jesus was impressed enough with the officer's faith to heal that slave. Yay, Jesus. How nice for that slave that he was healed. But gospel readings are rarely that simple. They almost always have a deeper message than recording a series of events. So armed with the knowledge that there is at least one more reason for this reading, one more reason for adding to our list of Jesus performing wondrous deeds, let's see what we can find to bring this story meaning for us and our lives today. One obvious point is we don't own Jesus. We as Christians do not own Jesus. God is not our personal household God that sits around waiting to do our bidding because we carry our good Christian ID cards with us wherever we go. God's love and grace is available to all people, regardless of who they are or where they are on the social hierarchy. In this story, Jesus performed a miracle for a high-ranking enemy soldier, but the actual recipient of that miracle was a lowly slave belonging to that foreigner. Lesson 1, God's love and grace is poured out for all people. All people, no matter who they are. Lesson 2, it's okay to ask. The centurion knew he was crossing boundaries when he, a Roman citizen with all his Roman belief systems and traditions, asked for help from Jewish elders to make a request from a Jewish miracle worker. Instead of sitting back helpless, wishing there was something he could do to help this valued slave, he asked. It didn't matter whether or not his request was important enough to take it to Jesus. After all, the sick person was only a slave, and slaves were a dime a dozen. He asked for what he needed. Don't hesitate to make your needs and the desires of your heart known. If you got something on your mind, go ahead and talk to God. You won't be burdening God or overtaxing God or wasting God's time when there are far more important things to do than listen to you. God is big enough to handle all of our prayers. It's okay to ask. Just ask. Another important piece for me in this reading, knowing the truth of a situation doesn't mean I know the actual or the whole truth. God is not bound by my understanding of what the logical outcome will be. Sometimes having a science background is a wonderful thing. It helps me to understand the world. It helps me to find comfort in the predictable science of a sequence of events. Life can be like a wonderful science experiment. We know before we assemble the ingredients that if we mix vinegar and baking soda, we are going to get a lovely volcanic mess. It's great. It makes us smile just to think about that certain outcome. We also know if we mix bleach and ammonia, we'll create a dangerous, toxic reaction that can make us very sick. Predictability is awesome. So for us science types, knowing what the inevitable outcome is for any given scenario becomes almost a way of coping with life and a way of limiting potentials, a way of creating blind spots to God's incredible grace. I've caught myself many, many times looking at a diagnosis from a fatalistic view. When my godson was little, he was sick a lot. There was an article in the newspaper about cystic fibrosis. When my godson's mother read that article, she saw her son described in every sentence. So she made an appointment with the doctor, took Michael and the newspaper with her, and asked that horrible question: could my son have cystic fibrosis? The doctor looked him over, ran some tests, and gave her that dreaded answer, yes. Michael tested positive for that terrible illness. Next steps, appointments scheduled with specialists, waiting and waiting and waiting for those appointments, and mobilizing a bunch of friends and family to pray for Michael. We'd all been praying for him already because he was a sweet kid that was sick a lot. Now, though, we had a new label and could pray more specifically. Some prayed for healing. My science brain prayed for appropriate treatment plans and for peace. Very logical, right? I knew what that diagnosis meant, and I knew it was a lifelong condition, that there was no cure. No sense asking God to do something that I knew couldn't happen, right? Fortunately, a lot of people in Michael's prayer group were not as educated as I am, and they prayed for a miracle. When Michael's appointment time finally came with the specialists and all the tests were repeated, this time they were all negative. Michael didn't have cystic fibrosis. So some of us got a miracle, and some of us got, guess that lab really messed up the first time. Lesson 3, let God be God. I don't get to tell God what can and cannot happen. I am not the one who with ultimate authority or ultimate decision-making responsibility. Let God be God. That's a pretty good place to put our trust, with God. We may or may not get the miracle we're hoping for. We won't know until afterward. In the waiting to find out, we may as well hope. We attempt to place limits on God when we don't ask because we don't think something can happen. Either this is the amazing, wondrous, all-powerful, all-wise God who created everything that is, was, or will be, and can perform any miracle we can dream of, or this isn't really God after all. The centurion in our story didn't place limits on Jesus. He understood chain of command. He understood distribution of power. He understood that his slave was in dire circumstances with the likely outcome being death. And he understood the importance of making his needs known. So he sent messengers to Jesus. That's code for he assembled his prayer team. Then he stepped out of the way and let God be God. What a freeing thing to not be in charge of everything and not to have to rely on our own knowledge. How wonderful it is to allow ourselves to be still and know that God is God. And we aren't. One simple story. A military leader from an enemy, occupying army, incredible force of power, someone we want nothing to do with. Yet, someone who was able to send 2 groups of people to make his petition known to Jesus. And a very sick slave is healed. The religious faithful, the crowd of followers, get a lesson in faith. May we, along with that crowd that followed Jesus, learn our lessons from this story too. God's love and grace is poured out for all people. It's okay to ask, let God be God. May we live in peace, trusting God to continue to pour out love and grace with extravagance, trusting God to hear our prayers, trusting God to be God. Amen. The response